Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 16. Today we're joined by Bill Winke of Midwest Whitetail. And in this episode, we're going to dive into the thrilling but equally frustrating challenge of hunting for a single specific buck. So stick around and enjoy. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. As always, with me is my co-host Dan Johnson, and joining us as a special guest today is Bill Winke of Midwest Whitetail. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hey, it's good to be here. My pleasure.
Excellent. Yeah, we really appreciate you joining. Right when me and Dan started the show earlier this year, one of the first people we thought about having on the show was you. So we're excited to have you, and I think, given the fact it's almost August, a lot of people are really getting the itch for whitetail hunting, so I think it's perfect that we're going to get to talk to you. And as I mentioned in the intro, you're the creator of MidwestWhitetail.com and the host of Midwest Whitetail TV. But for maybe those that don't know, could you share with us a little bit about how you got started seriously hunting whitetails and how that led to Midwest Whitetail?
I guess you go back a ways when you try to figure out when it all started. Obviously, a lot of people who are serious hunters started when they were kids, and I started when I was a kid. My dad introduced me to hunting. But the whitetail bug didn't really catch me until I was in my probably mid-20s, early to mid-20s. Where I grew up in northeast Iowa, we had rough grouse, pheasant, a few quail. We did a lot of duck hunting on the Mississippi River. And the deer were just kind of getting going in Iowa back then. So by the time I graduated from high school in 1982, we didn't have a real huntable population of deer. It was a big deal if you saw a deer track, on a snowy day when you were deer hunting. So it wasn't a resource that really grabbed a lot of people's attention. So it wasn't until later when the populations really started to grow and, the opportunists kind of jumped in there. And I guess I was one of those guys. I saw the opportunity to hunt some big whitetails and had a lot of permission, and knew a lot of people. So it was a natural for me to step into that. And northeast Iowa is known for the bluff country, the cold water streams, and the Mississippi River Valley and all the bluffs around that. So it's beautiful, classic Midwestern whitetail country. So that was kind of my beginning point. So I evolved from there, where I started writing for hunting magazines, and that started in about 1992. And I did that full-time for quite a long time. I guess it was 2008 when I started Midwest Whitetail, and prior to that it was 100% writing and photography for the whole preceding years. So, the handwriting, I guess, was on the wall with the writing business. It was starting to slow down a lot. You could feel the excitement was coming out of it. The advertising revenue was starting to go into TV a little bit more. The internet was picking up a little bit, but not much. For some reason, print was just starting to, feel a little bit sick. And I knew it was coming because, I had my finger on that pulse because I was doing so much writing. So I knew that I was either going to be bagging groceries at Walmart here pretty soon, or I needed to find something else. It was kind of one of those things where, I didn't feel like we could pull off doing television. I just didn't think that I had the experience as a host, and I didn't really have a bunch of people beating down my door wanting me to host a show for them. So I thought that it'd be easier to do something on the web. There's no real, standard, so to speak, there. You're not being compared to, the top-notch programming. You're more compared to YouTube, so I felt like we could come in a little bit raw and get away with it. So we started on the web, and my thought was to produce something that I would like to watch. And, I thought about some of my own whitetail hunting heroes, and I thought, if I could only see behind the scenes of what they're thinking about each day when they go in the field, that would really help me to understand what they're doing and why they're killing some of these deer. So I thought even, for better or for worse, whether we do well or don't do well, there's going to be something that we can teach. So the concept of Midwest Whitetail, of course, was to produce the shows online as close to live as we can get them. And in some cases, we'd kill a deer on Sunday evening and stay up all night, and it'd be, airing on the website Monday morning. That was an extreme example, but we've had a number of those over the years where we've killed one day and it was, up on the web the next day with all the lessons and the adventure of that hunt.
Wow.
So anyway, that was where it started, and it kind of grew from there as we gained more skill and more confidence. It evolved into the television show, and we still like the web better than the television show because it's so much more casual. We just feel like it's really comfortable, whereas television tends to be sometimes a little bit more confining, if you want to call it that. We don't get to produce exactly what we want to. We have to build everything into a certain framework, and then you can't stray too far from the norm, where you start to look like you're an amateur. So you kind of have to be kind of clean and professional, and we just feel more comfortable letting our hair down and doing the stuff on the web. So we'll never get away from probably doing both. As long as there's outdoor television, we'll probably have Midwest Whitetail TV, but we really do enjoy the web better than that because it's just so much more fun to produce.
Yeah, well, it sure has seemed to have done well for you guys. And kind of a story on my end, back in the fall of 2009, I had a job that took me out to California for the entire hunting season. And so I was just dying, not being able to be in the woods, not being back home in the Midwest. And every day I came home from work and I watched a new episode of MidwestWhitetail.com. And that was when I first discovered you guys. And I got to tell you really helped me just survive that fall. It really helped out. So what you guys are doing is pretty great, and I can definitely attest to that. So
yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Midwest Whitetail is probably the reason at work that I have low productivity.
Here's another funny story. I had a guy email me one time that his buddy got fired because he was watching Midwest Whitetail at work, and he was working. So I thought, we want people to watch, but we don't want them to get fired. Right. So there's people losing their job over what we're producing on the web.
Thanks a lot, Bill Winke.
Yep, that's funny.
No doubt. Now he probably hates me.
Well, yeah, I actually, it kind of ties into what we want to talk about today, but your final hunt for the double G4 buck, when that episode came out and I found out that it was online, I ended up watching it while I was at work too, and people were looking over my shoulder like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm sorry, this is important. I need to watch this right now. So that was
an epic drama. That whole hunt was pretty amazing because the deer was tailor-made for video because he was so visible. And, I had so many people that were following along on that story. It was pretty amazing.
Oh, yeah. And that's exactly what we wanted to get into today, was to talk about the double G4 buck and your hunt for one specific deer. But before we get into that, we do usually like to kind of throw a curveball just to kick things off a little bit. So, Dan, I know you've got kind of a crazy question you wanted to ask Bill to get us off on the right foot.
All right, so this is obviously for everybody, but Bill, if you could share a hunt with any person or fictional character, past, present, or future, who would it be?
So who would I go hunting with?
That's correct.
Oh, gosh. The cop-out answer, of course, is to say, well, I want to go hunting with my son or something like that. And I think if I only had one hunt for the rest of my life, I'm sure I'd want to spend it with a family member, and most people would. But let's just throw that one out and say that one's too easy.
Yep.
I think it'd be fun to go deer hunting with Jack Nicklaus.
Nice.
That's who I think, because I know he likes deer hunting. And, I loved golf, when I was 18 years old, I took the game up and just fell in love with it. And, of course, back then, Jack was the man. So it'd be kind of fun to get on some kind of common ground, and I could pick his brain about what it's really like, playing professional golf, and we could have some fun hunting deer. But I've never met him. I've heard that he's a pretty serious deer hunter, so that'd be a fun one.
Wow, I didn't expect that answer. That's a good answer.
That is a good
What about you, Mark?
Well, I didn't see this till just now either, so I'm kind of thrown for a loop. But I think the first person that came to mind for me when I'm thinking about hunters in the past, it would be pretty cool to spend some time with Teddy Roosevelt, given his hunting experience and his conservation work and kind of everything he's done and that's kind of led to the North American hunting experience that we have today. I think it'd be pretty cool to spend some time in the woods with him. So I think that's who I'd pick maybe.
That would be. If he'd be quite a leader, I'm sure it'd be fun to see how he handled himself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. How about you?
Well, well, I went off the deep end with this one. Mine is a fictional character, and if you've seen the movie Point Break with Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, I would love to go hunting with Bodie, Patrick Swayze's character, the bank robbing surfer.
Oh,
God.
Only you, Dan. Only you.
I love that movie.
If you'd asked me for my top 2,000, I wouldn't have come up with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's hang up right now then. I guess we have nothing else to talk about. It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Well, I've certainly seen the movie. I just don't think I would have picked him as a hunting partner.
Oh, geez. Well, with that said, then maybe we should move into the original topic, being hunting one specific buck. And as we talked about just a few minutes ago, your hunt for the double G4 buck was really, like you said, an epic drama and a perfect example of this kind of situation. So maybe to kick off this conversation, could you share with us maybe a brief high-level overview of that story of your hunt for the G4 buck, and then we can dive into some specific tactics and things that happen along the way?
Yeah, I will. The deer, when I first started following him, let's say, was a 3-year-old. I didn't try to kill him that year, but he looked pretty good. He was probably mid-140s, and he had 2 G4s side by side on both of his beams, and that's how he got his name. Well, the next year, as a 4-year-old, his one side, I can't remember which side now, I think it was his right side, was withered a little bit. His left side, if he would have matched up his left side, he'd probably been high 160s, pushing 170, 10-pointer, but now he only had 1 G4. So everybody kind of asked me, well, why did you have such a dumb name for this deer? Well, when we first started following the deer, he had 2 G4s on each side. But so anyway, I tried to kill him as a 4-year-old. And since then, I've kind of changed my tune a little bit on the age when I started hunting him. But it wouldn't really have mattered with that deer because he didn't really give us a lot of opportunities. I saw him twice. That would have been during the 2009 season. And hunted him pretty much every day. I would say I was open to the field a little bit too, other bucks that might come by, but I was trying to stay as close to the area where I thought he lived as I could. Saw him twice through the whole season, got a few trail camera pictures all at night, so he was pretty tough to pin down. So then the next year, so he would have been a 5-year-old in 2010. Is that right? Yeah. And he made a big jump from 4 to 5. He was probably just under 180 as a 5-year-old, really pretty 10-pointer, and didn't see him at all. I hunted him pretty much nonstop the whole season, got some trail camera pictures of him all at night in the dark. So basically as a 5-year-old, he was a ghost. Then as a 6-year-old, this would be 2011, that was when he grew his biggest frame. He was right around 205-ish. At that point, a big 6x5 frame with short brows. I mean, he was putting it all into his 2s and 3s and 4s. So he had really long tines, real long beams. I can't remember all the dimensions exactly, but when you saw him step out, it was like, holy, that frame just grabbed your attention. So he was quite a lot more visible as a 6-year-old. In fact, a lot of times he would be the first deer that came out into the field in the evenings. And I had a lot of encounters with him. I think I had 2 encounters within 40 yards, 3 encounters within 40 yards that year. One only got 1 shot off, hit him up high in the hump. It was just he ducked the string a little bit, and I was probably a little bit out of sorts, maybe a slight bit of buck fever with the way that the situation went down, trying to shoot out of a ground blind and having to jump from window to window. And, my wits weren't really, just lined up perfectly. So anyway, I hit him and lost him. And that was a late season hunt. That was an early January hunt. And he popped right back up again on the same food plot right after the season closed. So a couple days after the season closed, I had trail camera pictures of him back again. So I knew he was fine. Ran the camera there over corn until he shed. And I knew which one he was because he had a little notch out of his ear and he had like a black spot on his face. So I could tell, even without antlers, which deer he was. And as soon as I got a few pictures of him, or the first day without antlers, we went in there and we found both sides. I think he scored 95 and 92 were the two sides. And, of course, that was, now he was under my skin after hunting him that much and holding the antlers and getting a shot at him and making a high hit and losing him. So the next year, it was kind of all out. It was all out in 2011 too, but by 2012, we had him pretty well zeroed in. And to make a long story short, I had a number of encounters with him in 2012 and finally killed him. I think it was the 3rd of November, hunting out of a tree stand. And his core area, or let's say his entire range, continued to shrink as he got older. So he was 7 years old when I killed him, and he was probably living in about not much more than 30 acres, I don't think. Because we ran cameras enough around there that if he would have been traveling outside of that area, we'd have been picking him up here and there, at least occasionally, and we never did. We had to go right in there in order to get pictures of him, and then it was just nonstop pictures. I mean, he was very, very visible within that small range. And again, as a 7-year-old, he was probably one of the most visible deer on the whole farm. So that made him, tailor-made for video. If he was giant, and when I killed him, he scored 206. He actually scored a little bit higher, total gross score, but it was more massive and a few more sticker points, and he lost some of that just, that size of that frame, the big long tines and long beams, everything kind of shrank down just a little bit, but he got a little bit heavier. But anyway, he was tailor-made for what we were doing, with the online video, because I'd say at least a coin toss. If we went into the area where we planned to hunt him, that we would see him that evening. And, how often are you going to hunt a 200 plus inch deer where, 50% chance that he's going to come out? I mean,
that's crazy.
It's nuts, so we got a chance to learn a lot from that deer. And there's a lot of strategies that went into it. I could probably talk for 2 hours about, some of the trade-offs and some of the decisions that I made, with respect to where to run cameras and how often to check them and when to make the move, when I had an idea of where he was and stuff like that. I mean, there was a lot that went into that hunt, but, it's something that a fair amount of it is just common sense more than anything. I guess if there's a real lesson in it, because his range was so small, I was super conservative. And even though sometimes I'd have a pattern on him in the middle of his range, I had a camera right down in a little valley, and I think 5 days in a row he walked past that camera on a crossing over a ditch. It's just a tube that we put in to get from one little small field to another with the equipment. I had a camera on there, and I think 5 days in a row he walked through there an hour before sunset. And I was pulling the camera every day or every couple of days. It would have been really tempting to say, oh gosh, we need to be down there. But then you run the risk of swirling winds or something like that, giving you away. So we just stayed very conservative as we hunted him, and just figuring that, the deer's probably not going to leave this range because, he's spent so much time in there now and we've never seen him leave. So it doesn't make any sense to get real aggressive with him and kind of put him off his daylight activity. We just bided our time and finally got lucky enough to get a good clean shot at him. But, anyway, that's I could, like I said, I could go on for a couple hours on some of the trade-offs. But I'll let you throw a couple questions at me if something jumps out at you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you said, we'd love to talk with you for about this for 2 hours. But since we've got limited time, what do you think were the two biggest takeaways that came out of this that you think could be applied to someone out there, who has spotted a deer this summer? Let's say he knows that this is the one, and this year, I'm not going to shoot any deer but this one. For that guy or girl, what would you say would be the two most important lessons you could share with them right now to help them achieve that goal this summer or this fall?
Well, some of the most frustrated I've ever been was the year that I hunted him every day for like 60 or so days and or more and never saw him.
Jeez.
So one thing I'd say is I wouldn't get super serious about a buck until he starts showing daylight activity. And that's something that I've definitely changed, over the past 3 or 4 years. I used to find a great big deer or a bigger than average buck, something I wanted to shoot, and I would start hunting him. And I didn't really pay that much attention to what time of the day I was getting the pictures. And now that's the first thing I look at. I don't even care how big he is, but I want to know, is he killable? So I'm always trying to figure out, which bucks on our farm are actually killable. So that's priority number one, I think. If you're running trail cameras quite a bit, focus in on the ones that are killable, because really at the end of the day, this is supposed to be fun. And, if you're sitting there, day after day after day waiting on a buck that's basically a ghost, that's not really that much fun. Maybe you'll get him, maybe he'll slip up, but if he's not showing any evidence of moving during the day, he's very unlikely to all of a sudden, the only exceptions in my mind are that little brief window when the first doe in his core area comes into estrus. So you're looking at getting lucky and catching that, but sometime between, let's say, the 31st of October and the 5th or 6th or something like that of November, maybe the 7th. Somewhere in there, he's likely to mess up. And then that first really hard cold snap after the rut, a lot of times you can get bucks that haven't been moving at any other time in daylight. You can get them out in the open. But other than that, I don't like to hunt a buck that's not showing some daylight activity on the trail cameras. And then the next step is just trying to figure out as much as you can about the range of the deer, because what you're really looking for is the place where you've got an advantage. You don't necessarily want to say, well, he's going through here. Like I said, I knew he was going through that one ditch crossing almost every day, an hour before the end of legal shooting time. That didn't really help me that much, because I knew I couldn't hunt him there, without potentially messing the spot up. So you gotta spread your net wide enough where you get a pretty good sense of the range, the full range that the deer is using, and also what time of the day he's using those parts of his range. So I don't know, you just got to learn a lot, and trail cameras are really good for that. I mean, you can learn a ton, running cameras, and I was always really careful, trying to make sure that I kept the cameras away from. I think we're going to get an interruption here. I hear the UPS man coming down the driveway, but he's yep, there he is. I'll head him off and keep him from jumping in here with whatever he's dropping off. But the main thing is you've got to find a place where he's killable, and you've got to find a buck that's killable. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, and some of it's just common sense, and some of it's stuff that we've learned the hard way, over the years, on different strategies for running the cameras, whether you put it over bait, you put it over trails, whether you use, the time lapse or field scan mode on a food plot, and check the camera every day. What's the trade-off between where you put the camera versus the possibility of educating the deer. So it's all kind of a little delicate, maybe almost an art, to figuring out how you can learn as much as you can without educating the buck. Did I get long-winded on you there?
No, that's the stuff I'm particularly interested in as well, and I think our listeners probably are as well. And I think it'd be great if maybe you could dive into a little bit more just about specifically how you use those cameras, because like you said, that's a tool that I think is perfect for this type of kind of mission or project, is patterning a single buck. But yeah, I think sometimes people struggle. Like you said, there's a lot of give or takes there. So what have you found? I
could walk you through exactly what I did with this deer, but I think every situation is going to be a little bit different. That's why it turns into an art rather than a science, because you kind of have to factor the personality of the deer in when you're trying to figure out, how to go about, running the cameras on him. But this one, I started out, he was covering a lot of ground at first, the first few years that I hunted him, and I wasn't picking up very many pictures of him anywhere. But the whole key is, again, you got to have enough cameras in enough locations, and there should be sort of like key areas, maybe I was probably every 20 acres with a camera, I would guess. And in Iowa, it's legal to put a camera on a corn pile as long as you don't hunt anywhere near there or any trails leading to it. In some states, that's not legal to put a camera over bait. So it takes a little bit longer to get an inventory and to figure out what's going on. But you can do that by running the cameras over small feeding areas, the back end of a larger field, or maybe a food plot, putting cameras on creek crossings and stuff like that. I mean, there's still ways to do it. You just have to stay away from the bedding areas. I guess that's what it boils down to. I didn't take any risks at all with the areas where I knew that he was, or figured that he was bedding. And every time I went in to check a camera, I always wore waders. And that way I didn't leave any scent. A good set of PVC waders will cost you like $40 or $50 or whatever it is at Cabela's. And that's the cheapest insurance that you can buy for not leaving any scent. Because you can walk through waist-high grass. You can do a lot of stuff, climb fences. You can do all kinds of stuff in those tall waders, and you don't leave any scent behind. So there's a couple things there. The other, my thing was always to start wide. Start with a big net, and you try to figure out, where is the full range of this deer? Like we've talked about that real quick. And then as you start to figure that out, thank you. You too. As you start to figure that out, then you narrow in. And you start to close in on those areas where, okay, this is his range. There's no point in keeping running these cameras clear out over here because I'm getting, every day or just about every day here, and here. So then you start zeroing in and you say, okay, where else? How is he coming into the field? So you look at the first sequence of photos that you get in the evening, and you can see that his butt is pointing towards the north every time. The first couple of photos that you get. So you figure, okay, he's bedding someplace to the north of here. You might want to drop a camera someplace on that end of the opening, that end of the field, maybe a trail, or somehow try to work backwards to anticipate maybe where he's bedding at. And little by little, you can kind of construct the whole story. And some deer are more programmable than others. The older they get, it seems like the more patternable they are, which seems, the opposite of what we've been taught over the years. But I've certainly seen it here, many, many times. The older they get, the easier they get to pattern and the easier they get to kill past age 5. It seems like, 3, they're fairly easy to kill. At 4 and 5, they can be really tough to kill. And then it seems like at 6, they start to get easier again. Just in a lot of parts of the country, unfortunately, the deer never get to be 6. So, people don't get a chance to see that take place. So anyway, I then will narrow in on some specific spots where I think I've got a chance to kill him, and then I'm completely away from any kind of bait by this point. I'm not running bait on cameras once I've sort of narrowed in on where I want to try to hunt the deer at, because I don't want to have any issues with, any baiting issues. So I'm either running on trails, or I'm more than likely near a opening or a food source with the camera on what's either the field scan mode or the time-lapse mode, depending on the camera. And it just takes the picture. For me, I want a picture as often as I can get one, but most cameras are set for a minute. So if that's the case, sometimes I'll put 2 cameras out so they're out of phase. So I'll get one, maybe every 30 seconds, rather than every minute. Because, a deer can walk across an opening in a minute, and you don't get it.
Right.
So I might put one on one end facing in and one camera on the other end facing in, and I've got them both set to this time-lapse mode. And then I'll pull the card. I'll literally pull the card every day. Sneak in there at noon with my waders on, pull the cards, look at them. I've even gone so far as to go in, with the cameraman and all of our stuff, and bring a laptop. And if I didn't see any daylight activity, we can leave. We don't hunt. But if there was daylight activity, we climb into a tree. So, that's the whole thing is just trying to figure out, where is he moving during the day? And as soon as I'm getting daylight activity in a buck I want to hunt, that's when I would be a lot more aggressive and make my move. Up until then, I'm just sort of watching and waiting. It sounds like maybe I'm not spending very much time in the tree, but there's always other bucks you can hunt too. And if you've only got one tag and one deer in mind, it doesn't do any good to be out there in the field if all you're doing is messing it up. It sounds bad, but you're better off sitting at home than you are out there, beating around, leaving scent and potentially educating deer that aren't moving during the day.
Yeah.
Just put your time in, you wait, and then as soon as the deer gives you the green light, then you make your move.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn, but I think, I'm just starting to come up on that in my own experience too, is that it's a lot more about the quality of the hunt versus the quantity. And
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, a handful of really good hunts is way better than 30 mediocre hunts.
So true. So true.
Your odds of success are going to be better.
So Bill, I know you've got a hard stop.
I've done a lot of talking.
Yeah, I know you've got a hard stop on time here coming up soon. But really quick, Dan, did you have any thoughts or questions on this before we say goodbye to Bill here?
Yeah, I really like to talk about failure and how people can learn from their mistakes. Obviously, you were successful with the G4 buck, but on a hypothetical question, or how would your actions have changed if you found out like your neighbor killed the G4 buck, or he died, or he stopped showing up on trail cameras? Do you have a plan B?
Usually, I'll have another buck or something that I've got in the back of my mind. I'm not too hung up. I mean, I was hung up on that deer for sure, because after hunting him for that many hours and that many days, that many years, I really wanted to get him. Plus, he was really big, and it was cool. But to stay on that subject real quick, I was kind of sad when I killed him, though. It really did take a lot of wind out of my sails, not because I only wanted to kill a deer that big again. That wasn't it. It was because it was such a fun hunt. Those years, that quest for that buck was so much fun. It was so consuming. It was so entertaining. And then when he was gone, it was like, gosh, I got to find something else to take his place, because that was a lot of fun. So anyway, I've usually got more than one in mind. So if something happens to one, I'll move on. But I've made a lot of mistakes even with that deer. So it's not, I was ultimately successful, but I had a lot of failures along the way. And I think that's a good lesson for people too, is that, you're going to have a lot of failures in this game. And the failures that are best are the ones where the deer don't know what happened. If they know that a person in that tree inflicted, some kind of fear or injury, they're going to be a lot harder to kill in the future. And I was really lucky with that deer, was he never really figured out what was going on. I don't think he knew in that whole 4 years that he was being hunted. So even when I screwed up, it was, he just never quite figured it out, which is good. But there's a lot of mistakes along the way for sure, and every mistake teaches a lesson. And I think that's the main thing too. We just keep learning every year. I always try to figure out at the end of every season what I learned that year that I want to either do better or avoid doing the next season, because I just want to keep getting better at it, because I like shooting these things, and it's fun to learn. It's fun to figure out what the deer are doing, and the best ways to put yourself in the right spot.
So true. That is what it's all about. Just they find a way to screw us up a whole lot, but when we do figure it out, it's pretty rewarding. That's for sure. So Bill, I know you've got a hard stop here, so I want to be respectful of that time and let you go here. But thank you, so much for joining us. This has been really interesting.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, and I'm certainly happy to jump on again sometime if you want me. And today was just a tough one. I've got a couple things coming up here I've got to go do, so I'm going to have to run. But otherwise, just check back with me, and I'd love to join you guys again.
Sounds great, Bill. Well, we'll be sure to include links to MidwestWhitetail.com on the blog post for this podcast, and we'll direct people to check out the TV show too. So thanks again, Bill.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Take care, guys.
You too.
Yep. Have a good one.
Well, that was really interesting, and I wish we could have talked to Bill for longer, because I could have listened to him talk about this topic for, like you said, 2 hours. But that said, Dan, what did you think about this?
Well, I think the point that is trying to be made here is, or that I got from it, is you have to be patient to kill a giant. And he definitely played his cards right. Like he said, he made a mistake, but when he made his mistakes, they were good mistakes. You can learn from it. He didn't spook the deer. didn't leave the property. It didn't really know, like you said, it was being hunted. But I think patience going in after these things is kind of a trend that we're starting to see here with all these people that we're talking to.
Yeah, so true. And that's, I think it's so true no matter if you're hunting any deer, but especially if you're hunting one specific deer, is you've got this strange conflict of two things you want to do. You want to gather as much information as possible, right? You need trail camera pictures, you need sightings, you need observation data to figure out, okay, where do I need to be to kill this deer, this one deer? But at the same time, because you have one deer you're going after, the chances of blowing it are so much more astronomical than if you were after 10 different deer. So you've got to be so much more careful. So it's a really fine line you're walking. And I think that's though why it makes it so exciting and fascinating and fun to do that. And, I just recently got to experience something like this for the first time, hunting one deer, the deer I killed this past December for 3 years. And not to the degree that Bill had it, but I was able to learn some of his specific patterns and figured out some of the certain areas that he was consistently traveling to and the consistent areas I believed he was bedding in. And then, I had to do exactly what Bill said, and that's be really careful about when I hunt that property where I thought he was living. Because I thought if I screw up once, maybe twice, it's game over. So in my case, I was just really particular about when I was going to hunt. I hunted the first 2 days of the season, or the first two weekend days of the season, and then I didn't come back and hunt again till the very end of October, because I was just waiting for, there wasn't a big cold front I could hit on, so I decided to just wait till that little pre-rut action started, and just went in a handful more times after that, and I still screwed up plenty of things, but I learned a lot from that deer, and the fact that I ended up killing him. Interestingly, not exactly where I was planning on killing him, but I still was able to get a shot at him. I definitely took some things away from that experience that kind of fall right in line with what Bill said. And now, this year, I'm just really hopeful that that old Leaner, the buck I've been hunting, the secondary buck other than 6-year that's been around here for 2 years, this will be my 3rd year after him. He'll be an absolute giant if he's still around. So I'm still waiting, hoping he'll show up on camera one of these days, but we'll see.
Yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. There was a deer I called Shipwreck, and I think I've talked to you about him. And I had an encounter with him as I don't even know anymore. I shot him, and he was probably 210 inches, and never found him. And I had followed that deer for 4 years. The 5th year, the neighbor shot him and was on the cover of North American Whitetail. So I put all my eggs in the basket for that buck, and it paid off when I had the encounter with him. But I almost think that I spent too much time hunting that deer and not going after others, because it's almost like I became obsessed with him. I literally thought about that deer every day for almost 4 years.
And it brings up a good question. Now that we've talked to Bill and he talked about how to target one specific deer and how to go about hunting a deer, but should you try to hunt one specific deer? And the question being, like you just said, is all the excitement and the drama and everything leading up to trying to kill that one deer worth the obsession and the struggle and maybe the heartbreak in the case of where your deer was shot by someone else? What do you think now that you've looked back? You're saying maybe it wasn't worth it?
Well, for this particular instant, everything I wouldn't change anything, because I learned so much in that 4-year period hunting that deer that it's made me the kind of hunter that I am today. I was willing to eat my tag, and I still am willing to eat my tag every year I go hunting if I don't find a deer that makes my jaw drop or makes me get the shakes. And I have a little bit higher standards than a lot of people. That's not to sound cocky or anything. It's just the way I hunt. I don't need to kill to have a successful hunting season. But I also, I don't know. It's hard to explain, because you want to have these memories, when you get older, and have these mounts or racks or anything. But at the same time, you can't kill. It all comes back to you can't kill a giant if you're shooting small deer.
Very true. It's all about that choice.
So
if you want to.
Yeah. Yep.
So what do you think?
So the go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what do you think? Was that the single greatest lesson from a hunting perspective? Actually, tactic wise, when you were hunting shipwreck, what was it that you took away from that you think you can apply to future hunts?
Man, it's one of those things that you can't. You just need experience with big deer to. I'm not joking. When he stepped out and I had him at 22 yards at full draw, I was shaking so bad that it's like it was such an adrenaline dump that I couldn't remember the encounter. It took me like hours and hours to recall what had actually happened because, and as you get more experience with bigger deer, some of these professional hunters, if you want to call them, these celebrities, they've had such encounters with, so many encounters with these big deer that it looks like they're not enjoying it. But that saying, act like you've been there if you win a championship or something like that.
Yeah.
That's how you have to act when a big buck's in there, because if you let your emotions get the best of you, then you've already lost. Because that's exactly what happened to me. All those 4 years of anticipation finally came to a head, and I blew the shot. I mean, I shot him high, and that's user error. That's me.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say though, I gotta commend you, because if I had a 210-inch or whatever buck in front of me, I probably don't even know if I'd hit the dang thing. So.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. Not everyone's going to experience that.
No.
I was lucky enough to experience that, and I learned from it, and I take every lesson that I learned from that. That deer had so much patience. I watched him stop on a hot doe. Like, how typically deer will a buck will chase a hot doe right through everything.
Yep.
This hot doe came through an opening. He stopped where it became thick and started opening up, and he stopped right in all that thickness, observed the area, felt something wasn't right, and I had the wind, I had everything in my advantage, and he decided to walk along the thick stuff and cut these does off on a different angle, and that was another time where I was just like, oh my God, these guys don't take shortcuts. These deer are patient because they know that everything out in the woods is trying to kill them. That's how they live their lives. So it's nuts. It's nuts. And I hope this leaner buck shows up for you, because I know how much time and energy you've put into that deer as well.
Yeah, it would be really, really cool. That's for sure. Yeah, I think now, over the last 2 years, I've got so much history with him that if I got a third, it would be probably even a cooler story than it was for the 6-shooter, the deer I shot last year. So I don't know. We'll see. He usually shows up late in the summer, so I've still got a little bit of hope, but you never know. You never know. But
right,
it'll be interesting if I get that to have that opportunity. The stories that we'll be able to share over the coming podcast episodes this fall will be pretty exciting. So I don't know.
And I think the most important thing Bill said today was casting a wide net and narrowing it down, because and that's if you have the resources, if you have multiple trail cameras, if you have the time. He obviously lives near his properties, and he can be there all the time, and that's what he does for a living. I mean, he's a professional hunter. Other people have to rely on trail cameras and setting up observation stands on the weekends if that's the only time they get a hunt. It's just how you use the resources that are given to you, and how you go about the deer. Because like he said, every deer is different. It has different personalities, and you just have to be smart enough to learn from learn from that deer, learn from any failures that you may have in that pursuit.
Yeah, and like you said, I think in this type of case, you need to have those proper expectations that there are going to be a lot more failures than successes. Even more so than moving up from shooting any deer, shooting a decent deer, then from that to a mature deer, then from that to a certain specific deer. It gets harder and harder, no matter how much time you have or what kind of resources you have. It's a serious challenge, and yeah, you got to make sure that's the right thing for you. I wouldn't tell anyone to do that unless they're sure that that's what they're comfortable with and that's what's going to make them happy.
Right.
So it's an interesting topic, and one that, like I said, maybe we'll get to dive into more deeply this coming fall. If either one of us gets any return visitors, we'll see what happens.
Oh yeah, I checked my trail cameras this weekend, and I got a couple return shooters from last year, and got some new trail camera set up. I got new tree stands set up this weekend and some sweet pinch points, and I can't wait to get in the stand for the first time.
Oh.
I'm drooling.
It's going to be here before we know it too. It's coming fast. By the time this episode goes live, it will be, well, maybe not. Well, it'll be really close to being August. So, and August just flies by. And usually I don't like to go in the woods at all until, or once September hits, I'm done. I like to give it at least a good hard month with nobody in there just before the season starts. So that's going to be here before I know it, and I am not ready yet. So I really got to get out there and do some work.
Well, we have, my mule deer hunt and your elk hunt in September. That'll keep us out of the woods for a while anyway.
Very true. Very true. Well, I think this is a good spot for us to wrap it up too. So, for all of you guys that were listening with us today, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Bill, and we definitely did, and hopefully you learned a few things. I know that Dan and I are going to take some different lessons learned from this conversation, and we'll hopefully get Bill on a future show when he can speak with us a little bit longer as well. As always, hope you did enjoy the show, and if you did, we'd love to see a rating or review on iTunes. We keep getting more every week, and we appreciate that, and we love hearing the different types of feedback, so thanks in advance for doing that. And we, of course, want to also thank our partners who have helped a ton to keep wiredtohunt.com going, and now to help us launch the podcast. I know you hear it all the time on TV shows and in magazines, but this really is what keeps us going, so we appreciate them. So big thanks to Sitka Gear, Bushnell Optics, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Carbon Express Arrows, Lacrosse Boots, Big & J Long Range Attractants, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And we will include a few links that we talked about today with Bill on wiredtohunt.com/episode 16. So be sure to check that out. And, of course, if you aren't already, sign up for our newsletter. We'll get different updates to you, which will be increasing a lot more as we get closer to the season as well. So thank you again, Wired Hunt Nation. We appreciate you. Can't tell you how much it means to us that you joined us today. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a really, really great week. Thanks a lot. Well, I thought that was pretty great and hope you did too. And that will wrap things up for us here today on the Wired to Hunt podcast. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, if you enjoyed the show today, we would really appreciate it if you could leave a rating or review on iTunes. And even if you didn't enjoy it, we'd still love to hear your feedback. Thank you in advance for taking the time to do that. Speaking of thanks, we'd also like to thank our excellent partners who help make this show possible. So big thanks to Sitka Gear, Bushnell Optics, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Carbon Express Arrows, Lacrosse Boots, Big & J Long Range Attractants, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. That said, be sure to visit wiredtohunt.com/episode 15 to view the show notes from today's episode, and that's where we'll include all the links that we mentioned today. And if you're new, definitely head over to wiredtohunt.com to sign up for our Whitetail Fix newsletter. That's where you're going to get all different updates on what's new and interesting on the blog. So with that all out of the way, thanks again, Wired Hunt Nation. And until next time, have an awesome week. Keep on living the dream, chasing those whitetails. And as always, stay wired to hunt.